Glad to see you here. Talk a little bit about caregiver issues today. A lot of the subject matter is managing caregiver stress, and we will get to that, but before we do, I want to tackle a couple other things related to caregiving. Because our audience today is a little larger actually than those of us who are just in this room, we need to educate people about who the caregivers are. Incredibly, according to the statistic, persons in this country, older persons in this country who need care are getting it from 3 out of 4 families. In other words, if you're an older person and you need care, there's 3 out of 4 families out there who are 3 out of 4 older persons who are depending on their families to provide the care for them. So what that says is that these people are not getting care in institutions. They are getting care in their homes or in the homes of a relative. And the point of that statistic is that it's a very wide-ranging issue in our society. Who is providing the care for older persons? Those are family members typically. And the next statistic, $306 billion a year. The interesting thing about that is that's the estimated value of the care that you are providing to older persons in this country. In other words, if you were getting reimbursed for your caregiving, it would be worth $306 billion a year to the U.S. economy. That's a staggering statistic if you think about it. And the point being that A, we're doing a lot of in-home caregiving, and B, we're saving the healthcare system a lot of money. What's the problem? The problem is we're not getting much recognition. Kind of doing this, trudging along in isolation. So I want to talk just a little bit about this caregiver role. I call it the toughest job because of a lot of reasons. And we've just listed 3 very broad ones here. Most people who are providing care are doing it 24/7, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week without a break. Unfortunately, you're, as I said, toiling away in anonymity. Not a lot of social recognition or understanding of what you're going through. You know, and persons that you interact with who do this know, but the average person out there, if they're not engaged in it, it's kind of lost on them. And the problem with that is that because it's not a high-profile type role, we don't allocate the resources that we need to support the caregivers who are doing this very important job and saving our healthcare system $306 billion a year. So people become caregivers for all sorts of reasons. But I want to talk just a few moments about this interdependency that I think creates caregiving. They come to caregiving for all kinds of reasons, but the common thread that runs through it is that we have decided to help somebody else, right? That's why we're doing it. Maybe you are a spouse who is taking your marriage vows very seriously. Maybe you are an adult child who feels that you have an obligation to repay your loving parents for the care that they gave you. Maybe in some instances you are an adult child who didn't have loving parents, but for whatever reason, you feel that it's still your obligation to help see them through this difficult time in their lives. Or maybe you're just a friend or a relative or a neighbor who sees the need and wants to do something about it. So people come to caregiving for all kinds of reasons. The thing I want you to remember is that in your caregiver role, I've run into so many caregivers who are hard on themselves. You're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days, just like everybody else. Try not to be so hard on yourself, okay? I know it's easier said than done. But as I'm pointing out, you've undertaken one of the toughest roles in our society, one of the most underappreciated, and I would ask you to give yourself permission to not be perfect at it, okay? Now, the one thing that caregivers don't try to achieve is they don't do this for recognition. They're not out there saying, hey, look at me, I'm a caregiver. They're just out there toiling away. But throughout this program, I want to encourage you to be aware of what resources are out there. And if you are in a position where you need some help, give yourself permission to get some help. Don't get the help to get recognition, because that's not why you're doing this. Get the help to provide you support to the best that the services can provide support, or get the help to have some other human contact, which is very important. We know about isolation in caregiving, don't we? There's a nice passage in this book. This is a very neat book. It's called Life Gets Better. How's that for a title? By a woman by the name of Wendy Lustbader. It's a book I really like. It's actually a book about aging, successful aging, more than caregiving. But I like this one passage because I think it points to this interdependency that we all have with our fellow human beings to take care of each other. She writes, more than anything else, becoming a caregiver places us in a situation of accelerated awareness of our interdependence. Caregiving has taught me that we are responsible to, not for, each other, and that relationships are not disposable. It has allowed me to grow in ways that without it, I don't think I would have grown. And finally, she writes, witnessing a loved one's transition from autonomy into dependence forces us to ponder all of our relationships. Who would take care of me if I became frail? Interesting question. And this goes into, again, we'll get to some practical ideas about managing caregiver stress here in a bit, but I really like to focus on this idea of caregiving as a role where we're taking care of someone else, because we might be in that situation someday. And this is another book I really like. It talks about more the spiritual journey of caregiving. You can see the title there, and the author is Beth McLeod. And I really like this quote. I came to the realization through a journey in which I endured intense emotional pain and grief that by giving oneself to another, we receive the gift of personal growth and strength. So when I talk about caregiving, I don't want to just paint a picture that it's this awful role where we're miserable doing it, because it has its days and it has its moments throughout the days. But I like to try to look at it through this bigger lens. Call it spiritual if you wish, but just the idea that this is really important stuff and we make a decision to do it. And maybe at some point we're the recipient of some rewards and some good things about caregiving. So let's talk about the rewards for a moment. We all know that we've made the decision to help someone through a difficult time. And I also like to think that this is helping us understand the types of things in life that really are important. We get this barrage daily of all these trivial messages that are sent to us through so many different sources. But when you guys are in that role, helping one-on-one care for somebody else because they can't do it, and you're doing your best to make their quality of life as good as possible, that's what's really important. You get to work on these skills: patience, compassion, tolerance, and love. And one thing I will always tell the caregivers that I work with is that this is something that, having gone through this and having done this for another human being, is something that you will always be able to hold on to. That's something that will never be taken away from you. And down the road, I'm pretty sure you're going to look back with a lot of satisfaction and say, I did that, and I did it successfully. And I did it by honoring that person's dignity. Because as you know, that is such a big part of this caregiving role, is you're doing your best to make sure this person maintains their dignity as a human being. So now we can't ignore the piece of caregiving that creates some stress. And all this slide shows is a few issues. I'm sure you guys could add to it. We could have lots of slides on what increases your stress as a caregiver. But so often people I've worked with have found themselves thrown into the role. A loved one might have an accident, a loved one might have a stroke, heart attack, something like that, or they might have been having dementia sort of come on slowly, but all of a sudden that takes a turn and then their dementia's worse. And so you're thrown into this role, and going back to the spouses who are caring for a husband or wife, so many times they don't even realize that they're a caregiver. They're just persons who are married to somebody and fulfilling their marriage role. But frankly, when a person becomes debilitated, you're thrown into a new role. And you're really not educated or trained on how to do a lot of the cares. And if you are educated on how to do a lot of the cares, you have no idea what to expect next often in the role. Stuff keeps coming up. Well, I didn't have any experience in this. So you're thrown into that new role and you're sort of grasping for straws on where do we go from here? How do I deal with this? We talked about the 24/7, and then the biggie. We all want to fix it, don't we? So that helpless feeling while you're watching a person's health deteriorate, and you're watching them get worse maybe day by day, week by week, and there isn't anything you can do about it. You can help maintain, you can help meet their needs, but can you stop that progression of the disease? No, and that's where we all want to fix it. And it's so hard, I think, for people to come to that realization that I want to fix it and I'm helpless to fix it. And how do I connect those two things? We're fixers. You haven't gotten a lot of training. You may not have gotten any information on caregiving. Again, this is an isolating role. This is a role where more and more there's information being put out there about caregiving, but there's been quite a dearth of it to this point. And so where do I find that information that I need to do this role successfully? And then another biggie, the validation. I think this is so important because, as I said, caregivers don't do this for recognition, but I think it's critically important that those of us who work with caregivers are forever providing validation that what you're doing is right and good. And particularly when you're in a situation where you're going solo and you're having to make the decisions. And that's a very uncomfortable feeling when you don't have someone to bounce these decisions off of. You're doing the best you can. And it's important for those of us who work with family caregivers to provide that validation. It's important to hear that. I just put behaviors. I don't know that I particularly like that label, but with dementia particularly, maybe you've got some real challenging behaviors or actions on the part of this person. How do I deal with that? You know, where's the book on what chapter is that, right? So another huge stressor. And then finally, money drain. It's expensive. I was working with a guy just the other day who, unfortunately, he and his wife had accrued so many medical bills, and it wasn't through any real downfall of their own. It's just that the person's health had deteriorated, and they had so many medical bills. One of them included having to take one of these life flights from Canada back to their home in the Midwest, which was incredibly expensive. And so the expenses started to pile up, and we were trying to create suggestions on how we could get him some help, but we had to do it within the context that we only have so much money here. And of course they had some income, and they had worked. They were sort of in this middle class role where you don't have a lot of extra money sitting around for care, but you're not going to qualify for a lot of entitlement services. Just one more slide on the primary issues. Uncertainty on how long will this go on. You know, our crystal ball is broken. We can't see how long this is going to go on and what the outcome is. Is it going to be another week? Is it going to be another month? Is it going to be another year? Will it be another 5 years? We don't know. And we touched on these decisions and the self-doubt, particularly when you're having to make all these decisions by yourself. I think it's pretty easy to get into a situation where you doubt yourself. But I really would encourage you. I have worked with many caregivers over the years, and I can think of almost nobody who wasn't making the decisions in the best interests of the person they're caring for, and who wasn't making good decisions. In other words, everyone I've worked with has been doing it for the person and has been making good decisions. And sometimes I will try to point that out to caregivers. I have the advantage of looking from the outside in. You're on the inside, and you're surrounded by this role day and night. But I have the advantage of looking from the outside in. And you know what? You're making good decisions. And you're doing things right. And you have been all along, so keep it up. Anybody, well, let's see, the condition changes. We get used to a person's situation as it is, and then all of a sudden one day we wake up and things are different. What brought that on? What's the explanation for that? What do I do about it? And then has anyone dealt with sleep deprivation while they've been in a caregiver role? Of course. And I can tell you I'm not at my best when I don't have my sleep. And I think many of us aren't. But sometimes you have to do what you have to do, and you get behind on your sleep, and it creates a lot of problems, doesn't it? It creates a lot of stress. So this is another slide that we could have multiple slides, the emotions that you go through as a caregiver. I've kept it just to one today, but some of you may recognize some of these. Some of you may have others that you'd like to add. But one of the things I try to tell caregivers is that, you know what, you're human. When things aren't going right, you get angry, then you get guilty because you got angry, and I understand that. But again, let's go back to earlier. Try to give yourself permission to not be perfect. You're still a human being who gets angry at things, okay? And that's okay. But there's a lot of loss. As you know, there's a lot of loss, there's a lot of grief. A lot of times people think that, well, grief happens after someone has died, and you know differently. Grief may happen every single day while you're in a caregiver role. And loss may happen every single day, and sometimes it's the loss of what the person is now not able to do anymore. But sometimes it's the loss of what we as a couple used to do and now don't do anymore. So there's a lot of loss and grief in there, isn't there? And of course the others, as you can see, you're familiar with. The isolation, I would emphasize too. I've been in a lot of situations where I've called on persons in their home who are the caregiver for someone else, and we've just sat at the kitchen table and talked about current affairs, because that's the best relief that they can get at that time, is to have this connection with this other person and just have a normal conversation. So how do we manage stress? I guess that's one of the things that we came here today to learn about. And I'm guessing that a lot of you know these things. I'm guessing that this is just a review for many of you. But I do think it's important to review it. I can't overemphasize how important it is to get that information about the role that you're in. Get the information about the disease that the person has, about some of the characteristics of that disease, about some of the things that you might be able to expect as that disease progresses. And then find those persons who are going to provide that validation for you. We could do a whole nother seminar on family dynamics and persons not supporting caregivers. That's for another day. But if you've got those people who are being judgmental, who are questioning you, I know sometimes we have to interact with those people, but try to stay away from them. That's not healthy. It's not helping you. And they apparently have their own reasons for doing that, which aren't healthy to begin with. Find those persons who do have somewhat of an understanding of what you're going through and talk with those persons and get that positive feedback from those persons. Don't be afraid to tell your story. Again, this is not doing this for recognition. This is not saying, look at me, I'm doing this, but don't be afraid to tell your story. It's an important story. And you need to find that person and that time to relate it to somebody. And don't be afraid that you're wasting their time or you're boring them or whatever. If they truly want to support you as a caregiver, they have the time to listen to your story. And it's an important story. I don't care what it is you're doing. And it needs to be told. Those supportive relationships that understand the issues, there probably is no one that fully understands exactly what you're going through, because they're not in your role. They're not taking care of your person who has that personality or who has that history with you. But there certainly are persons who understand the framework of caregiving and understand the framework of a certain disease process and some of the hallmarks that you might both have encountered in that disease process. So find that person that understands to some extent what you're going through. It's really critical to spend time with that person. And then there's going to be a slide here in a moment about how professionals can help or hinder you in your role. And this is one of the areas right here. The healthcare system itself could be a whole nother seminar too, but we'll stick to just a few issues today. And one of them is that You know, you got 5 doctors involved in the person's care, and they're not talking to each other, and you go to this one and they say something, you go to that one and they say something different, you know, and you just want to beat your head against the wall. Keep looking for that person that's going to be able to answer your questions accurately. Look for that person that's got some empathy for the person you're caring for, and for you, who's not talking past that person that you're caring for. They're still an adult with dignity. I know everybody in the healthcare system's in a big hurry, and you've encountered that, I'm sure. Skills mastery is really important, I think. And when I think about this, I think about hands-on care. If somebody's in bed and you're doing hands-on care, there's techniques. I am amazed. I've worked with nursing assistants over the years in my work with nursing assistants right now. And I am amazed and very appreciative and in awe of how well these people can do their work. They're magicians in terms of turning people, transferring people, getting people clean and bathed and dressed while they're lying on their back. Use those folks. We tell people in hospice, if you want to have a home health aide as part of our team who's coming into your home, let those persons teach you the roles of providing hands-on care. And that's what I think of when I think of skills mastery. There's others. You can also have skills in how to communicate with healthcare providers. There's a whole a lot of other ones too, but that's kind of the one I think of. We've talked about understanding the disease process and what you can expect as time goes on. And then the one that I'm sure you've heard more than any is self-care. And I would be remiss if I didn't bring that up today too, because it's critically important. I know it's tougher to do than it is to talk about. But we've had a couple of folks. I know one person I've worked with has used an adult day center for his spouse to go to a couple days a week, and he's actually gotten a part-time job, a few hours during those days. And it provides him a break, it provides him interaction with the public, it provides him this interacting with other people. And she's in good hands and she's safe. And that's an excellent example of respite. We've had other people who have had family members who are willing to come in and take on the role for a while, maybe friends or neighbors. Doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen. And sometimes a respite may be 2 hours for a volunteer to come in and let you go out for 2 hours. Sometimes it may be to try to get out of town or get an overnight sleep somewhere and just kind of rest, recharge your batteries. Caregivers sometimes, though, are so, they care for somebody else all the time. They don't care for themselves. We set up volunteers for somebody recently, and all they could think of was they felt bad for him because they had to drive 40 miles to come down and be a respite person for him. And I said, don't focus on that. They're volunteers. They're good people. They want to do this. You focus on letting them come down, and then you get out and do some things that you want to do. Resources. The good news is that more and more now there are resources to help support caregivers. When I started doing this kind of role, I think it was 2001, there wasn't much. And about that time, the federal government started to wake up and realize, hey, there's caregivers out there. And they actually started to allocate some money to states to distribute down to local agencies to support caregivers. And now there's more and more. And the good news is there's more and more each day, and there's more recognition each day. Does that mean, you know, at 2 o'clock in the morning when your person is wandering around the house that you're going to have somebody ring the doorbell and say, I'll take care of this? No. We're not there, but there are some. Oh, there's that other one again, not expecting perfection. I keep bringing that up. One thing in hospice that we talk about a lot is caregiver confidence. One of my roles as a social worker is to go in to a family's home after they've been admitted to the hospice program, because those first few days are very chaotic. You may have just received bad news. At a minimum, you're switching gears into a whole new situation. And you're starting to get people calling and people coming to your home that you've never met before. And it can be very chaotic. And one of the things I like to do is sit down 2 or 3 days after all this has started and just find a quiet time for that caregiver, find a quiet place, and say, okay, I know we're in here now. There's been a lot of information given to you, which if you're normal, you've retained about 10% of. How's it going? How can we meet your needs? How can we meet the person's needs you're caring for? And really try to do that one-on-one with them instead of just add to the frenzy of, here, I'm another person. Okay. So in terms of caregiver confidence, I want to talk to them about some of the things that we're talking about today. I want to try to assess what their specific needs are in that situation and see if we can connect a resource to that need. Simple empathy goes a long ways when you're dealing with persons who are in this role. If you can convey to them that you truly do care and you truly do appreciate what they're doing. And you shouldn't be working in a role where you're supporting caregivers if you don't, because that means you don't understand what they're doing and you don't understand the magnitude of what they're doing and the importance of what they're doing. And this tricks of the trade is kind of what I was talking about with the home health aides, and sometimes you do return demonstrations, maybe that's how you learn. I'm going to show you how to turn this person in bed, and then I want to ask you to return the demonstration. You do it a few times and you feel more confident doing it. We try to provide a education or a teaching role too. It doesn't do any good if we come in for an hour visit and do all this stuff and never tell you what you're going to do for the rest of the 23 hours that day, right? Okay. Respite really does work. Try to find that strength within yourself to allow somebody else to come in and take that role. I know I've worked with a lot of people who say, well, they can't do it the way I do it. Well, that's true. But it's still going to get done, and it's still going to get done well. And I know that guilt comes into play, but I've never been in a situation where somebody has taken some respite and their absence has caused some very significant problem. When I talk about a balance, I really do mean the balance between your needs and the needs of the person that you're caring for. Again, this is easier said than done, but just finding that time to get a respite volunteer in there, or some other person, some other situation like adult daycare or something like that, where you might get out and do that walk around the block with a neighbor. So hard to ask for help, isn't it, if you're in this role? You feel guilty if you ask for help. One thing we tell persons who are trying to reach out to caregivers, don't just say, well, give me a call if I can do anything. That doesn't help anything. Because you know what? Caregivers won't give you a call. Say, Miss Caregiver, is it okay if I come by on Tuesday from 2 to 4 and sit with Mr. Care Recipient while you go out and do X, Y, and Z? That's specific, and it's harder to turn down if somebody presents it to you like that. And then the resources that are out there, find those persons who know the resources and can help you. Often one thing leads to the next. In our caregiver support group, I'm very happy about how Sometimes the persons will share with each other things they've learned, and then I'll contact this person and they'll say, well, I don't necessarily do that, but this person does. And so, I know you don't have a lot of spare time to be on the phone all day, but the point is that one thing often leads to another, and some of those issues can be met. So I think it's critical for persons who are working with caregivers to try to realize what you're going through, to put ourselves in your place. The one thing I try to do before I go on any home visit in my role is to take a few moments before I go in and collect myself and think about, now this person is doing this. This is the news that they've gotten. This is the disease process that they're dealing with. What would I be like in that situation? Of course, I'm not going to be able to be you, but I want to try to take a few moments to put myself in that mindset so I can be the most helpful. Again, honoring the individual's dignity. There's nothing worse than when you go to an appointment and the person is talking right past the person who is receiving the care to you. That's just not acceptable. I tell professionals when I do these types of talks that look at this as a family system. This is not just your patient. This is a patient, this is a caregiver, this is a system that you need to be aware of, and you need to not only identify what's going to help your patient the most, but what's going to help the rest of that system too, and take the time to listen. There's probably nothing more critical than not looking at my watch because I have to think about who I'm going to go see next. I want to give you my undivided attention while I'm with you and let you tell me your story, your needs, and then I will identify what I can do to try to help those needs. Support groups, they're not for everyone, but for persons who are willing to sort of go out on that limb, show up to the support group. We've got one running right now, and we really try to make an effort to make persons feel as welcome as possible. I know it's intimidating, particularly if you're coming by yourself, to come into a group of people, but you know what? That group of people are your people. Once you get through that door, they are going to be providing this empathy and this validation and some information for you. So if that's your thing, that's where people understand. And really the benefit of it is not just emotional, but it's very practical. You can learn some very practical information on how to help your situation. So these are just a couple of places. I often have people say, well, I didn't even know where to start. So maybe your physician's office or the hospital social worker. Each state has a Department of Aging, and the way aging services are organized is that it's at the state level, and then it's at the regional level, and then it's at the local level. So that's what this slide talks about, because you'll get the state, and then you'll get Heritage, which governs 7 counties in eastern Iowa, but then you'll have local agencies in your community to help share what the resources are. And this is just a neat quote out of one of my favorite singers' songs, Greg Brown. I just think it says a lot. So I want to thank you again today, and I will be happy to answer any questions. Talk about whatever's on your mind. If it didn't sound like it made a lot of sense, tell me and I'll correct it for my next presentation. Thanks.
My name is Jane Murphy. I never hesitate to start the questions because I still have so many and so many comments about your presentation. So how about if I start with one? You talked a lot about how the folks with whom you've worked, Steve, always make good decisions, and how do you think a family should operate when they feel like certain members of that family are not making good decisions concerning the loved one? Because that's where I am right now. And so
just to clarify, you feel like you're making good decisions, but you're being questioned by other persons.
actually I can't call the shots. And that kind of moves into the other point that, you talked so much and about folks who do this on their own, and I have nothing but compassion for all of you, like Kathy. Is it Kathy? Right? Yeah. But I am one of 5 siblings trying to take care of our dad, and his second wife has 5 children. It makes it very, very complicated. And so that can be a detriment too, if you want to add that into your presentation. I know a lot of people who would agree with me about that. And yeah, you say so too. So that's one of the points. But how am I, as a caregiver, although long distance, supposed to deal with decisions that I feel are wrong?
What kind of communication is in the family? How does it look?
Well, within my family, it's very good. None of us is local with my father. We all have to travel at least 10 hours to get there. And so we're only one at a time usually on site. And so I love my siblings. I think we're all trying very hard. But his wife still has a number of legal options that she holds very closely, and her children have a completely different mindset. And so there are lots of people involved, and I know it's incredibly complex, but I just wonder what you say to that.
Well, somehow I knew that was going to be a blended family example when you said that. I suppose I should backtrack just a bit. When I see caregivers making good decisions, this is in a home with a person taking care of another person. So often I will say, you don't see this, but you have taken step 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and those are all excellent steps, and that's just what I would have suggested. So that's kind of what I meant by those making the good decisions. The problem, Jane, in the scenario that you lay out, is that the healthcare system puts a lot of importance and weight on who the substitute decision maker is.
What if the trustee or executor has become unable to fulfill the distribution duties? We have real problems with my dad's wife's distribution abilities. And I guess yeah, that's really all there is to say. But
you're caught in a situation where you have little control, unfortunately, and as you have figured out, because we put so much weight on who a person's substitute decision maker is, and if their spouse, is, they automatically get that role by default. And the standard is very high to remove that. And there's no easy answers to that one. Because at some point he chose to form a union with her, and she, by default, got that role.
So that's fine. I don't want to take up all the time with this discussion. I just wanted to air the issue. So I know you have no answers, but
Well, I have some answers, but not for that.
My name is Pat Harney, and Steve, I had talked to you many years ago. My husband had a severe stroke and a mild heart attack in '93. But what she's saying about her siblings, I could relate because Bill and I both had lost our spouses years ago. So we had 8 children between us. So when it came time for him, he was in a nursing home for 14 years. And he passed away in '07. But I'm saying that when it came time for him to come home on visit on the weekend, I had a hard time getting all of the kids to participate and help me at home because he 5'11", 200 pounds. I cannot lift him up and down and out of bed. So we needed at least 2 children there to help. But all 8 of them did not help. And I just think, well, this is your dad, guys. Wake up. Well, the excuse was, I got to work this weekend. I got to do this. I got to do that. And I thought, I was working on the weekend, too, at the Holiday Inn in Little Manna. But someone had to be there, Bill, during the daytime. And I was putting in 7, 8 hours in housekeeping. Then come home, fix supper, and then he comes home like Friday night, and he stays Saturday night, and I take him back to Wellman Sunday. No one offered to drive him back to Wellman.
How long did you
From Oxford.
How long did you do this, Pat?
14 years. So, working at the Holiday Inn for 12 years, a substitute elementary teacher, and I did not give up any of my activities as a caregiver because Bill said, why? So I continue on doing what I wanted to do. I am a bowler. I did that during the winter season. 1 day a week, that's my outing. 2.5 hours. And continued substitute teaching, and I'm still substitute teaching, going on 37 years. So I'm not giving up, even though everything is past, and I'm still out there on the farm in Oxford, and I'm fine with it. But it's just the idea that it's hard to get not only your siblings, but your children to help take care of mom, help take care of dad, and therefore you just kind of...
Well, my experience with that, Pat, is, and like I said, family dynamics is a whole different seminar, but the thing is, everybody has a choice to make on whether they're going to be involved or not.
Yeah.
And you know what? If they're not going to be involved, what can you do about it? You can't do anything about it. So what I have suggested to caregivers is to, I know it's frustrating, and I know it makes you angry, but put that energy into figuring out what you're going to do without them. Because I have never seen someone who has been in this situation who's decided not to help, turn around and then help.
And it just got to the place the word decision was a dirty word. Because trying to find a nursing home is like pulling teeth. It's very hard. And when he was from here, Mercy Hospital in Iowa City, then went to Yonker Rehab in Des Moines, and then 3 months passed, and then tried to get him in a nursing home. I shopped around and I couldn't find anything closer to home, but the doctor in Des Moines got him in Grinnell, 50 miles from home. And I went up there every week and spent practically the entire day with him. And then he did come home on visit too. But then it got to the place, well, He's been there 7 months now. We're going to have to shop around. And so it was just decision making, and I just hate that word. You hate it. But I found a place closer to home, 18 miles.
You actually have a success story.
Yes, and I have told people about it, and support group, I'm all for it.
And you made it work. You found out what the hurdles and the challenges were, and then you made it work.
And so the support group, and you talk to somebody else who's going through this, talk. Because they will understand what you're saying, just like I'm understanding what you are saying. But you were saying it was your siblings. I was comparing it with the children. So compare and talk to people that are going through it now. Don't hesitate.
You know, the other thing, that sort of the bigger issue there, and this is not an excuse, but sort of the bigger issue, I think, is that people grieve differently. And sometimes family members are grieving, and this is how they choose to display it. So it doesn't make it any easier.
Steve, you might just on what Pat said, talk about the caregiver support group, just so the rest of the audience knows there's this resource out there.
Yeah, the first and third Wednesday of every month at the Johnson County Fairgrounds, the ISU Extension building down there. We have a nice group meeting, and myself and Jeff, who is the director of Pathways Adult Day Center, are the facilitators. And Jeff has graciously offered the facility free of charge for the person who is receiving the care while you attend the support group. And we would certainly welcome you and would love to have you. And I can tell you that this group has wonderful chemistry. And there's some wonderful group members in it. And we actually spend a lot of time laughing, which may sound kind of odd, but you need that. And you need it badly. And I think, it can be that respite in it, and there's a little humor in there. And one of the members last time brought some items to the meeting that she had discovered that helped her help her husband eat better. It's on the plate, you can put a tray on the back and certain utensil modifications that have been made. And she just brought those and showed the other caregivers because her issue was trying to keep the food from being all over the place. And so there's an educational component to it also. And it lasts for an hour and a half, from 1 to 2:30 on that first and third Wednesday.
May I just add that there is a very wonderful support group that meets regularly the first Sunday of every month at the Senior Center from 12:30 until 2. I think that's the regular time. It is under the auspices of the Alzheimer's Association. And it is specifically for dementia patients. I don't know if everyone here is dealing with dementia issues, but that's the first one I went to, and I find it invaluable.
Thank you for mentioning that, because my friend Barb Faust is one of the facilitators for that. That's an excellent group too. And I don't think you can have too many of them. Go to that one, go to the other one, go to both of them. Do whatever fits into your schedule. So thanks for bringing that up, Jane. And that's at the Senior Center, downtown. Okay, well, thanks again for coming out today, and let us know how we can help.